Morning all. I'd like to show you a very interesting game this morning of Mikhail Tal against Dieter Keller. So in the Zurich tournament of 1959 we saw on this channel Mikhail Tal drawing with Fischer in this tournament, but Fischer suffered a defeat, two defeats, and one was the Dieter Keller, and it got me interested to see how Mikhail Tal played against Keller, and it turns out it was a magnificently complex game. So Mikhail Tal was playing white. Dieter Keller was a Swiss chess master born 1936. In 1953 he tied 5th to 8th in the Copenhagen tournament. In 55 he took 6th in Antwerp. Also he took 4th in the San Benedetto del Tronto tournament. In 1959 in this tournament, Zurich, he took 12th. Mikhail Tal won the event, and Keller in this tournament beat Fischer in their individual game. In the next year he took 2nd in Zurich. I'm not entirely sure if lots of very strong GMs were invited in 1960. I couldn't find a reference to that tournament to find out. In 61 he took 8th, and he also tied in 61 1st to 2nd with Carlos Guimard in Enschede. In 1975 he tied 1st to 3rd in Zurich. He was the Swiss champion in 1958, 60, 61, 63. He played for Switzerland in 3 chess Olympiads. In 1956 he was 4th board, and he scored +5, -5, drew 6. In 1958 on 3rd board he lost 1, drew 4, and in 1968 on 1st board at the 18th Olympiad he won 4, lost 3 and drew 7. Okay, and he was awarded the IM title in 1961. So he was having good tournaments overall in the tournament. Well, a fantastic scalp later on against Fischer, but this earlier round, knight f3 from Mikhail Tal, and Dieter Keller plays knight f6 after c4 e6. So knight c3, it looks like an English opening, and Dieter Keller now plays d5. But now we start to transpose into a Slav. So after d4, c6, a semi-Slav, with this very rock-solid pawn chain. And Mikhail Tal chooses bishop g5. So he's dynamically offering the c4 pawn here, and that's actually taken. So after e4, black tries to cling on to that c4 pawn with b5. So interesting decisions here. On Livebook, e5 is the most common move with 1803 games. a4 is the second most common with 196 games, and it's a4 that Mikhail Tal chose, trying to undermine black's pawn chain. We see now bishop b4 is actually the most common move here, just pinning the knight. This next move is 72 games, queen b6. That's what was played in the game, and also bishop b7 is 52 games for those interested. So queen b6, and now white's most common move is just to take on f6. So this not only doubles black's pawns, but it means the d5 break has more power to it, and potentially breaking up black's pawn structure even more. So for the moment though, Mikhail Tal plays bishop e2. You've also got to factor in this position, this g-file might be dangerous if white castles here. That g2 could be a problem, especially if this bishop is coming across this diagonal later. So we see here actually a6. Now after castles, bishop b7. So it looks as though this bishop is going to be working with the rook soon. But despite this, Mikhail Tal wants to get to the black king here, and he breaks up the center with d5. Okay, black now does c takes d, and after e takes d, you might think, isn't this a little bit dodgy because of b4 in this position, trying to undermine that d5 pawn. So b4 is played, and you might think, well, okay, maybe knight e4 here is playable. Let's have a quick look now, start analysing this. So if knight e4, black has e takes d5 and he's protecting f6, and this is a pawn armada. So knight e4 is really not an option, it seems. It doesn't seem at all good to play knight e4 here. Maybe if we follow this through, a5, queen d8, again protecting f6, knight g3. It's actually from an engine point of view, okay, it's a bit better for black, but not hugely better. White has some dynamic compensation. But anyway, after b4, Tal actually plays a5, and now queen c7, and here he doesn't play, again, he doesn't play knight e4. If knight e4 here, in this position, knight d7, and okay, if d takes, we're unleashing this bishop. This is a real problem with the whole concept that in this position, you know, black can end up doing very well like this. So this is to be avoided, this sort of position. It doesn't really offer white too many prospects. So actually, after queen c7, the game takes a bit of a Tal turn here. Leaving the knight on c3 is a common attacker's resource, just to accelerate an attack, and Tal plays actually d takes e6. So with the black king still in the center, it's attractive to just sacrifice the knight, but for what concretely? Well, after b takes c3, we see the move knight d4, and there's threats like bishop h5 now on the cards, or e takes f7 and then bishop h5. It looks quite dangerous here for black. Black, though, does make use of the bishop and the rook, plays rook g8 against white's king. Now, should white just play g3 immediately here, pardon me, in this position? If g3 is played, yes, it could really transpose into the game, so I might as well just show you the game continuation. Check. And in this position, okay, let's see what happens if knight c6. This is very good actually for white. E takes f7. And if queen takes f7, we just take the knight. That's not very nice. And if king takes, we play queen takes c4 check. And this is really, really bad now. Knight e6 check, forking king and queen. So basically, queen a4 check needs to be handled with care. It's actually prompting the king to move here. Anything else, it doesn't look at all good. So the king is compelled to move. So king d8. And now we see this move g3. I think this is one of the best ways to handle the g file. If we try and blunt like this, we're weakening basically this diagonal here. This can't be any good. This position, bishop c5 is quite good here, or even bishop d5 first. It looks quite scary with the king on d8 though, but this is better for white. Doesn't really want to do this because bishop c5 is an imposing resource here. So g3 is the more solid way to handle this g file pressure from black, and that's what is played. So for a moment, solidifying king side. And okay, we've got this king on d8, and black wants to try and shield it. He can't really play king c8. I think this is a very bad idea because of queen e8 check, queen d8, e takes f7, and this is just very, very bad for black. For example, bishop d5, knight e6. It starts to get really quite painful here. This is a crushing position to be avoided, absolutely crushing. So king c8, for example, is out of the question. So the king's kind of, it looks to be in big trouble, but this next move, bishop d5, is a very good move actually in the circumstance. There's not much else. It does mean actually that the b7 square might be good for the black king, but the safety of b7 is determined, or going to be determined, by what happens on the b file here with these two pawns. So let's see. Rook. We see now rook fd1. Interestingly, this might be the wrong rook. As a Fischer quotation in 60 memorable games might appear. The wrong rook here. Now why is this? It seems from an engine point of view, rook ad1 is actually better. Let's just try and demonstrate this. If black is materialistic, very materialistic, with c takes b2, e takes f7, queen takes f7, and now apparently, this is a really good position. I mean, it looks as though black's position is very precarious here. There's actually threats like knight c6 check, and it looks absolutely terrible for black, this position. And it's interesting that Tal didn't just go for this. Maybe a slight slip up, maybe he was a bit overconfident against Keller or something, but it seems as though he may have chosen the wrong rook here, because this looks absolutely ideal. If rook g5, now rook fe1, I mean, it's wonderful with engines that we can analyze this, but the threats like knight e6 check now, it's very dangerous, this knight e6 threat. How does black actually defend here? For example, rook a7, knight e6 check, we'd be winning d5, bishop takes d5. So this simply rook fe1 here, and black's position does seem to be collapsing. Bishop c5 again, we play knight e6 check. It does seem to be collapsing here. So it looks as though this was the best rook to use. So rook f d1 here. Let's have a quick look at so in the game also, in this position, I'm not sure that okay, after bishop d5, pardon me, we're saying not rook f d1, we're saying the right rook to use is rook a d1. In the game we saw rook f d1. So what is the big difference here? Well, the big difference here is what's going on with c takes b2, which seems really greedy. But here, if black had played c takes b2, white is compelled, hasn't really got time to do anything too active here. He has to move the rook, it seems, and then c3, and the rook's a lot more tied down to what we've just seen. And here it seems, black is actually relatively safe. So e takes, queen takes, bishop c4. You would still think this surely is dangerous. We've got some of the old threats here. Rook g5. But you see, without this other rook being here, there's no knight e6 to make d5 weaker. So the rooks here, because of these pawns here, they're not as ideal as on d1 and e1, because we'd have that threat of knight e6, which is quite crushing to undermine d5 here. And it seems that black might actually be holding this. So even after being super greedy, playing like a computer or something, but technically black's position is on like a knife edge. Say queen b3, black has to be very careful. If he does play something like this, then this is a mate in 3 with knight c6 check, queen b6, and then rook d8. That'll be a disaster. But black's position on a knife edge here, and the engine's suggesting king e5. This doesn't look like a human wants to play this position either with black. After these pawns get mopped up, the king seems quite exposed. So this looks like a very difficult position for black to play. But apparently, an engine wouldn't be that bothered. It's a small advantage even for black. But I think from a human point of view, it's very difficult positions to play. But anyway, it seems that after this rook fd1, which might be the wrong rook, okay, black's best might have been to be greedy, but black actually played king c8, which looks entirely logical. Get out the firing line of the d-file. But it seems here that white's a weakness of that last move, it's not protecting e8, and it seems actually Tal did have here queen e8 check technically. And this changes the focus of attention actually quite a bit to this pawn. For example, if queen d8, then e takes f7, and this pawn is pretty nasty. If the rook moves here, let's for example rook g5. Now knight e6 is really a crushing resource. Again, attacking the queen like this, it's all over. So this pawn is really dangerous here. And you might think, okay, if king b7, but what I've mentioned before, the safety of b7 is dependent on what happens on the b file, and these two pawns in particular. And simply here b takes c3, and it looks as though again black's in big trouble here with rook ab1 check. The king is not really finding much shelter in this position. As an example, knight c6. Here the pawn can use e takes f7. The queen doesn't have to go anywhere, so it's still like laser beaming the back row against the king for rook ab1 to be effective. So let's say, for example, queen takes f7, check, knight b4. Now if king a7, then knight takes c6, and now here queen e3 is mating. So basically this is really dangerous. So knight b4 is a desperate try, but now queen takes, check here, just taking, and you know white's hugely better here actually. So it seems that the move queen e8 check is winning whatever happens, is winning on queen d8 and king b7. The b file seems too dangerous on king b7, and on queen d8 it seems e6 and take on f7 is the big issue. So it's interesting that Tal didn't play queen e8. It's like, did Tal not pick up on so clearly on the weakness of the last move? Was this a rough Tal game? He wasn't feeling that well this morning or something? It's a very interesting, very complex game here. And it's very easy for us nowadays to run such games through very powerful engines and say, oh, queen e8 is winning. But it's always the follow-ups that are really tricky to find out, of course. But it seems that there's a fantastic follow-up available after queen e8 check, which does mean it's very promising. But Tal played b takes c3, and this allows black to avoid the wrath of queen e8 check. Black plays bishop c5 now, so holding that square. Okay, and now black might even start to have serious threats as well, because this pawn, you know, is being pinned for rook g3. If this knight ever moved to the wrong square, you know, if this, for example, knight f3, just to demonstrate, but rook takes g3 is playable here. For example, just to show that the pin is working here. So it's not only that e8 is sorted out. So this doesn't look very good by comparison to what we've just seen. So does Mikhail Tal still have an attacking initiative here? Well, he still can try and get to the black king via the b file and the d file. And also there's this diagonal to factor in as well. And we see this move e7, which means that bishop g4 check might be a resource at some point in the future. So what is the point of e7? Can't it be taken with, say, the bishop? If it's taken with the bishop, well then there's no pin on f2, and knight f5 is now playable, so without any rook g3 resource. So white is threatening now rook takes d5, and it does seem very scary again. But let's go with bishop e6. And it seems here, you know, black is more solid than what we've seen anyway. We can say that black is much more solid than what we've seen. And it seems white's best is just knight d4, and we go bishop d5. And white's best is again knight f5 here. What is white actually doing here? What is black actually threatening? Black's threatening knight d7 and maybe knight e5, and then later f3 is going to be a problem as well. So maybe, you know, white's best is to play knight f5 and repeat. Just repeating this threat. If bishop b7, for example, you know, bishop g4 is very strong here, because this rook is kind of overloaded to e8. You know, if rook takes g4, queen e8 check, and now knight d6 check is really quite crushing. So it looks technically as though the repetition is in order here. But anyway, so bishop takes e7 is very, very interesting. Queen takes e7. What happens on queen takes e7? Bishop takes c4. Again, rook g5. It's not entirely clear how white smashes black here. Although h4, let's go with h4, rook e5, bishop d5, rook d5, queen c4, rook e5, rook ab1. Now white is threatening queen d3 maybe, and just trying to get to the king like this via the h7 pawn. So this seemingly innocent threat might be a way in to black's position, potentially queen d3, to get something going here like this, because that b file cuts the king from the b file. So if the queen can start attacking the king via the back row, even if it's via the h7 route, then that should be something for white, a tiny advantage for white. It starts to get very difficult for black. But anyway, in the game after e7, funny enough, the pawn was ignored totally with knight c6, which seems quite logical, just to get on with development. Try and get this rook out, try and get the pieces out. So knight c6. And we see here now, though the danger of the pawn is revealed, Mikhail Tal plays actually bishop g4 check, but this might not be the most accurate move. So the point here is that if rook takes g4, well, we queen, but we also need to have a quick check of knight f5 in this position against d5. If bishop e6, for example, now bishop f3, and there's more targets here than before with that knight on c6. So bishop takes f5, and this could actually be very, very nice for white. This type of position here. Say rook d5. Okay, it's opposite coloured bishops, but white is doing very nicely here. But in the game, okay, we see bishop g4 check, and now after king b7, it looks as though the king might be in danger on the b file. You might want to throw in a check here. If we throw in a check though, after king a7, it's unclear. A little bit unclear how the attack proceeds again. If knight f5, bishop e6 here, bishop f3, bishop takes f5, queen takes c6. I think black is actually, well, he's winning b1 here, that's a key difference, and can give up the exchange like this. This looks very, very dangerous, but technically it's equal, actually, or nearly equal, this position. Believe it or not, it's not a huge advantage for white. White's down to two last attacking bits here anyway. So okay, so it looks as though okay, where were we? After king b7, rook ab1 check, king a7 is not such maybe a big deal. We see though, I mean, it might be one of the best moves though in the position anyway, rook ab1 check. But we see actually knight b5, and this is very interesting because maybe it looks really dangerous attacking d5, and it forces black into very limited options. D5 is attacked. If a takes b, queen takes b5 check, and say here, then we just mop up like queen takes c5. And then rook takes d5. So it can't be taken, but with d5 attacked, and the queen e5, and in this position, it seems, Mikhail Tal played rook e1, and there does seem to be a very, very powerful move for black here, which for some reason hasn't been mentioned by kibitzers that much on chessgames.com. Now one reason for that is, although there's a lot of kibitzing, it was chosen as a daily puzzle, this game at some point, which gets a lot of attention, but maybe not for the entire game and the defensive resources, maybe more on the puzzle position. But it seems that black has a very valuable resource here after rook e1, which is actually to play queen g5. Now in this position it looks, technically from an engineering point of view, black's doing actually very, very well. You see that the pressure's off d5. The knight on b5 looks dangerous, but it's not actually doing that much. And what is black threatening the knight? What does white actually do here about the bishop? If he plays like rook a b1, queen takes g4, and not minding the discovered checks like knight d6, king c7, so what? What's going on here? There's nothing much going on. What do we do? We're going to get murdered actually. Bishop takes f2 check, queen f3. White's going to be mated. So it seems a very, very bad position actually after queen g5. I'm really not. I'm kind of not sure how Tal was feeling this day. It looks as though it's just a rough game, and maybe he'd gone out to town the night before or something. It doesn't seem. There's moments in this game. It's pushing. Tal's quotation, about sacrifices comes to mind. There's a few quotations that come to mind, which I'll put in the video here. But it seems queen g5 might be one of those moves here, which I'm not entirely sure what white can do in this position. Actually, I think you see most of the danger elements. The visible danger elements have gone. With this rook here now, no pressure on d5. It looks as though, white's king is in big trouble on this g-file. Look at all this g-file pressure and these raking bishops. You think ordinarily, white's really asking for it as well here. It's not just the black king. Black's king actually looks safer than white's king. But remarkably, maybe it was Tal's hypnotic stare or something. But black felt the need for not playing queen g5. He actually played bishop e4, going into this self pin, and seemingly still with this very big threat of just taking on g4. Okay, and I guess with the queen kept protecting c5, that might also be useful as well. Now, okay, how can white go wrong here? Well, if he does move the bishop, surely his king side's going to get it, and rook takes g3. This isn't just imaginary. These bishops and rooks and the queen are quite dangerous here. So we'll get smashed like this, for example. So this is a very, very critical position where white's king safety is a big question mark over it here as well. So the bishop cannot be moved. It's a key defensive resource on the g file here. So white just plays now virtually, I think the only one of the only moves. Rook a b1 is played. And now it becomes apparent that this adds a lot of difference to the idea of the discovered check on d6 here. So for example, rook takes g4. We've got now rook takes e4 for this discovered check and double check, discovered check, to win the queen at least. And this will be better for white. Not hugely better, because black's got some material compensation, but better for white. So that's very, very good news. So this pin, unfortunately, doesn't seem to look very good at first sight of rook takes g4 in any case. And actually, that is actually the game continuation. So sorry, let's have a look at another alternative before venturing into that game continuation. What can actually black do here? He doesn't want to give up the queen like this for two rooks. Bishop takes b1, rook takes e5. You'd think, actually, this is a very interesting point, that white would be interested in winning the queen here with rook takes e5, but nothing is routine in complex positions. Actually, white has far stronger to take on b1. If he does take the queen here, knight takes e5. I mean, it's two rooks for the queen, and black's now got these threats. What does white do? Say bishop e2. bishop e4. This is actually better for black. So no, far better in this position is to treat this as an exchange sacrifice on bishop takes b1, to play actually rook takes b1, and in this position now the black king is feeling the cold in this position. So say, you know, rook takes g4, knight d4 discovered check. Now if knight b4, queen c6 check. If king b8, e8, and this is much better for white. So this pawn on e7 is a sting on the end of the tail here for these things. So this exchange sack here would be very, very good for white, not taking the queen there. So rook ab1, and all of a sudden it does seem as though what has black done? He had that fantastic move queen g5, and now all of a sudden Tal's stared at him perhaps, and you know, he played this self pin. And once you create a pin against Tal, you might as well resign, really. Okay, this is just horrible that there's these threats here, and an invisible threat like bishop b1, rook takes b1, which just leads, it seems, to a terrible position for black. So anyway, in the game we saw rook takes g4 as mentioned, rook takes e4. So on queen takes e4, we've got knight d6 check. And that is actually played. Well, as an alternative, rook takes e4, knight d4 check is the problem. And again, you know, any knight b4, okay, what do we play on knight b4? Possibly, you know, queen c6 check is still strong here. In this position, rook takes b4, queen b6 check, queen d8 check, queen d7 check, and now not queening but queen d5 check, and taking the rook here, and white's doing well. It's very, very complicated stuff, but white's, you know, doing very well here. Okay, so let's go back. So rook takes e4. It seems, you know, so rook takes e4. If that was played, knight d4 seems good. There's also other alternatives as well here, like rook takes b4 as well, just clearing things out of the way for queen c6 check. And again, this position seems good as well. These checks are really quite useful here. So queen d7, and in this position, then we've got knight c6, and that's why queen c7 is forced to end up losing the rook. Okay, so again, we see reinforcing that pattern. So rook takes e4. You know, I believe that black really missed his chance here against Tal when he played this this bishop e4 move. It didn't seem to really help. So here, okay, we see queen takes e4. Now knight d6 check. So double check, discover check, winning the queen. So knight takes e4, rook takes e4, and now. Okay, what is black actually threatening? Black's got some material. Black might want to just take this pawn with a knight or play rook e8. White actually plays queen d1, which introduces threats in the position, which unfortunately are too much. Maybe Dieter Keller is already regretting having this position. White's a little bit better now. With that pawn on e7, that there are very dangerous threats lurking here, including rook b7 check for queen d7, and also queen d5, you know, for just trying to get material like this. So it's against queen d5, which black handles with rook e5, unfortunately missing rook b7 check. So what could he have played in this position? Well, knight, just getting rid of that pawn. I think this isn't so bad. There's no if rook b7 check here, you know, the check here is actually it seems to be this sort of position might be absolutely palatable for black. Black might actually be better. You can almost imagine a kind of fortress being set up, 3 pieces against the queen. So taking the pawn would be a good idea just with the knight. to handle, to try and remove the power of rook b7. But we see the full power now of rook b7 after rook e5. That pawn on e7 is really a menace. So check, check. And now the pawn is getting a whole rook under much more favourable circumstances than we've just seen, because although it's 3 pieces for the queen here, unfortunately the cruel queen d7 check is winning the knight. So 2 pieces for the queen. Okay, and here black resigned. Now, on this very superficial analysis of this game, and I believe it is superficial, I think that there is a Tal book apparently where this has been given 47 pages of analysis. So I think, although you might think this was more than a casual analysis, I believe it's only a casual analysis, what I've just shown you. But from this casual analysis, it seems, with the help of Houdini, a very, very powerful engine, it seems that black at a critical moment may have missed the power of queen g5 for whatever reason here. Queen g5 would seem to be giving black a chance technically in this position. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. A fantastically complicated game, and one which I thought I'd show you because it was actually Mikhail Tal, became world champion in 1960, and apparently it's one of Tal's most favourite games, and it's a game he didn't really want to annotate apparently in his Life and Games book because it was just too complicated, and he felt the risk of analysing it incorrectly was too high, or he'd missed loads of stuff. And I believe, I'm going to put a big disclaimer, I think this is what I've shown you is a very, very superficial analysis of this game, and it's probably best to get the book, which I'll mention, which I haven't got in. I'll put it in the description of the video, where apparently there's been a huge analysis of this game, incorporating notes from Kasparov and Karpov and others. It's a fantastically complex game. So 1959, just a year before Mikhail Tal became world champion, and he won the Zurich challenge in 1959, just ahead of Fischer. And Dieter Keller did Tal a big favour, beating Fischer in the penultimate round. So a fantastic achievement anyway for Dieter Keller later in this tournament. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.